Welcome to the Clive Barker podcast. This is episode 49, Weaveworld Part 2. So in this part, we didn't go quite as blow by blow into the plot of the book, and went more, I think, more kind of the overall story, and then talked about our favorite parts. And I think this gelled a little more because I think we got a little more sure of ourselves and how we wanted to talk about this book. So anyway, this is part 2. We recorded it just a couple of days later. One more little quick bit of news. This is kind of cool. In Maximilian Bacchus and His Traveling Circus, that novel that was Clive Barker's first novel that he wrote, that's been recently published, is now has been adapted to a screenplay by Mark Miller and has been bought by an animation studio called New Machine Studios in Canada. So that's pretty cool. It's, we could look forward to maybe in a few years seeing Maximilian Bacchus animated. So anyway, here we go back to episode 49 of the Clive Barker podcast, Weaveworld Part 2. Book 2 starts with the fugue opening, and then the council meets and they decide to shut it down again, or to reweave.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because that part has like 2 moments there that are really funny. One of them is when Cal walks out, and I'm sorry about my voice, but I kind of feel like I got a cold going on.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I was coughing on the previous call, but one of the moments when Cal is walking outside, the fugue has unwoven itself and has laid itself over the landscape. Mm-hmm. So we see like all these structures and people and seer kind and animals appearing in the world. And it's funny because he walks past this guy who's looking for his dog in the middle of the confusion. And he's like, "Hey, have you seen my dog?" And it's like, "Damn fool mutt." And it's like, the guy is like, he doesn't even know. He doesn't even notice, or rather,
yeah,
he notices it, but he doesn't want to acknowledge it. And he's just looking for his dog as a way to keep his sanity, I suppose.
Yeah. And there are some like crazy things, like a car is up in a tree, I think, or...
Mm-hmm. And then Hobart, due to his own sheer will of his insanity, mm-hmm. he keeps thinking that the anarchists have done this, and that that
and he thinks somehow, it's like chemical weapons and psychotropic drugs or something.
Yeah, and he wills himself to look past what he calls the illusions, and it describes that the illusions start to recede until they disappear entirely.
And not just for him, but also for all of his other policemen.
Yeah.
Because he convinces all of them, too.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly what he's seeing in his eyes, but he kind of wills himself into seeing the old city and not the fugue.
Yeah. And we were, just before this episode, we were talking and kind of decided, just for, for the benefit of you listening out there, we kind of decided that it's probably best if we don't go, beat by beat through the entire plot anymore, like we did on the last episode. So we're kind of going to go more generally over what happens in book 2, and then kind of talk about, as we go along, kind of talk about our favorite parts or things that stick out or connections that we make to other things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that that when the fugue is unwoven, mm-hmm. and they decide we have to meet up with all the Sirkan has to meet at Capra's house.
Yeah.
So they all meet at Capra's house, and they're deciding about that the world is not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an interesting moment when Susanna meets her grandmother's lover, Romo.
Yeah.
So he's still alive. He was actually in the Weaveworld.
Yeah, and it's funny because her family, Susanna's family, always called him some kind of a circus performer, and it turns out that Romo is a lion tamer of sorts, or else he has friends that are lions, or he gets mistaken for a lion tamer because he has lions around him all the time.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah. And there's also the orchard. Cal visits the orchard of Lemuel Lowe that has the fruit, the giddy fruit, I think.
Yeah, the giddies. The giddies. It's a really interesting chapter. We talked about that earlier in the episode when you mentioned that Clive has his memories of going to an orchard when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And the orchard of Lemuel Lowe is a beautiful chapter. I like it very much. And there's people like dancing, performing, reciting poetry in the orchard. And even he goes on and he reads this poem, which is probably the first poem from Clive Barker they actually memorized, which I think is called Six Commonplaces.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's really pretty.
That's
Let
the
me
one
see if
that's the first part of love is...
Yeah, one part of love is innocence, one part of love is guilt, and one part, the milk, which in a sense is sour as soon as spilt. One part of love is innocence, one part of love is lust, another part the resentment of our return to dust.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just memorizing. It is. And then he goes on to say, forgive my art, on bended knees I do confess, I aim to please. And I think this was one of Mad Mooney's poems.
Oh, yeah. It? Yeah, and Cal at first was really, really reluctant, and they pretty much had to drag him up there and make him do something. They just said, perform, you ate our fruit, now entertain us.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like, oh, but and it's kind of the typical, you would say, cuckoo way of thinking is that, I'm not really good enough, or nobody is going to have any interest in anything I have to say. And then he sort of reluctantly starts reciting Mad Mooney's poems, and everyone cheers, and they think it's the greatest thing in the world. And it kind of boosts up Cal and makes him feel like this is his home.
Yeah, he feels really good at the orchard. Another interesting moment is that, of course, when the feud was unwoven, Shadwell and Immaculata were there at the auction, and Immaculata was forbidden to tread the fugue ever again, but still she finds herself in the middle of it. And her two sisters finally actually speak now. They have a dialogue between the three sisters. And one of the things that they're talking about Shadwell, and at one moment the Magdalene says, well, if you don't want him, can I have him? He would make great children. And she grabs the Immaculata grabs the Magdalene by the neck and says, you can't lay a hand on him because he's mine. And then the hag says something like, yep, he's yours, body and soul. And then I think it's the hag that also says, too bad he doesn't have a soul. Oh. And she says, oh, he has a soul, all right. But, once this is done, I'm going to release him unharmed. I guess she has some kind of honor thing going on where she has some feelings for Shadwell for what he did to her and how he taught her to hide and live in the world of the cuckoo. So I think that's the closest thing that we see to the fact that Immaculata actually respects and to some extent wants to protect Shadwell.
And I think that in Clive Barker has complex moralities in his books. So you could say there's usually a bad guy that you can sympathize with and a bad guy that is absolutely beyond any kind of hope. And I think that Shadwell sort of turns a corner and becomes completely unsympathetic. But Immaculata, you start to sympathize with. She does horrible things, but you also kind of feel for her. She's sort of the Christopher Carrion, I guess, of Weaveworld.
It's true. Yeah, I kind of got that sense too while I was reading the book that they both start out as mysterious characters, and while Shadwell grows deeper into unsympathetic territory, when you first see him, he's very charismatic. I mean,
and Hobart is the opposite. I mean, he starts out really, really unsympathetic, and then by the end of the book, you kind of feel sorry for him.
Yeah. He actually tries to stop some of the terrible atrocities that the Scourge is about to cause, but he's powerless, of course.
Yeah, and he sacrifices himself.
Yeah. It's funny because other things that are classic Clive Barker, I guess, is he manages to insert a reference to William Blake in here.
As one of the chapter openers?
No, it's in Tales of the Spook City, Chapter 7 of the Book 2. There is a moment where they're talking about Gluck's calling card. Mm-hmm. It says, A.V. Gluck, the card announced, and below the Birmingham address, a phrase in red ink. What is now proved was once only imagined. And then the quote is from William Blake, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell.
Oh, so, yeah. I remember.
Yeah, Virgil Gluck is the guy who deals in strange objects, mysterious things.
And at this point in the book, you kind of wonder what is his purpose in this novel. Because he sort of comes and he goes, and it's like he's like a visitor that Cal didn't really invite, and he's a strange character, and then he disappears, and you don't see him again until the end.
Right, where he actually is very important for the whole reunion of Cal and Susanna, because they will get separated after the weave again. But before that, it's like Gluck has this. He feels like he came out of the Great and Secret Show, and why I say this is because in the Great and Secret Show, and in the trilogy of The Art, which is still incomplete, but those books, we have what is called the Reef, right? Which the Reef is this it's basically a data bank of strange events and strange circumstances and reports of miraculous occurrences that is being handled by is it Grillo? Yes, it's Grillo, right?
Yeah, right. Nathan Grillo.
Right.
Oh my gosh, these memories are just now coming back to me because I can't remember very much about the books of the Art.
Yeah, I read them a long time too. I need to reread them. And Gluck pretty much also has an office. We will find out further in the story. He has an office where he's got crates of artifacts, newspaper clippings, even a box full of dried frogs who fell from the sky.
I think he has them in jars.
Yeah, or something like that. Yeah, and so it's this guy is he's I think he represents the part of humanity who always tries to find out what's behind these mysteries, if in fact they're real.
He believes there's something more, and he has a lot of theories about UFOs and aliens and things. Yes, but he really wants to be a part of the mystery instead of sort of left out and not understanding.
Yes, and he has boxes and boxes full of these files, which is really funny. So, I mean, there's also another chapter.
Yeah. So after this, when the fugue's been reweaved and Cal and Susanna kind of go back to their own lives. Well, Cal does. Susanna is running, with the carpet. But it gets really sad, and I think this is kind of the central premise, or one of the central premises of the book, is that the despair of forgetting your childhood wonder at the world and taking things for granted and going back to your normal life, and Cal kind of goes into despair and forgetfulness. He forgets the fugue, he just remembers it as a carpet. And he forgets Susanna, kind of. I mean, not 100%, but he forgets, the adventures that they had. He just kind of remembers her as a person that he met.
exactly. And you said carpet, but it's a book, right? When it's rewoven, it's into a book.
Oh, no. It's still a carpet because Susanna and Jericho.
Okay, never mind
are
that
traveling
part,
around with it, and they're having to hide it in their hotels and wherever they go, and they're always like one step ahead of Hobart because her menstruum power gives her foresight, so she knows when he's going to appear right before he does. So they're traveling all over England, trying to stay ahead of Hobart, and they haven't seen Immaculata or Shadwell in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But Hobart's been on him. I mean, he just his own. At this point, he hasn't quite yet teamed up with Shadwell, but Hobart is his own, or he had, but he's kind of on his own crusade against the anarchists that he thinks everybody is.
Yeah, the anarchists. So at this point, I guess the objective of the seer kind is to find a place where they can unweave the fugue again. Yeah. Like a place outside of the scrutiny of the cuckoos.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because Virgil Gluck actually is going to find some evidence of the unweave of the fugue, right?
Yeah. So then eventually Susanna is getting closer and closer to being caught, and there's this mysterious prophet that shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And Susanna or Jericho goes to meet with the prophet. And anyway, some bad stuff happens. She loses Jericho. She goes to find Cal, and the police catch her. Yeah.
Yeah, the prophet is kind of an evil character here.
Yeah. But he's fooled. There's a lot of cuckoos in the world, it turns out, that stayed when the fugue came undone.
Mm-hmm.
And he's sort of gathered them all up, and he's got this sort of righteous energy. We want to get the fugue back. We want to open it up right now. We're going to take over the world and free the world of the cuckoos, and just a lot. Just a lot of rhetorical kind of nonsense that gets everybody all riled up and excited. And he tricks. One of the main characters of the book, Nimrod, is tricked into believing in the prophet.
And Nimrod changes shape also in the book.
Yeah, at this point he's not a baby anymore. Now he's been turned back into his normal adult self.
Yeah.
And he was a baby because he was trying to hide from a husband of some wife that he was having an affair with.
Yeah, that's typical.
And then he got stuck that way when they weaved the fugue the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that at the time when this book was made, there were these students from a college of fine arts who actually made a version of the carpet.
Yeah.
And they offered it to Clive. And I think for the show notes, we can actually find some pictures of that.
Yeah, there's a black and white picture of it, I think, in Shadows in Eden, right?
Yeah, there's one I think there's actually another one that I saw once from a newspaper clipping or something. And the cover of Weaveworld that I have, the paperback, the cover is very similar to that carpet. I guess they must have used that cover to make the carpet.
Okay. Yeah, but the Poseidon one does have it's got a border of a carpet, but it doesn't really look like the Weaveworld, like how it's supposed to be described. This just has like little flowers and
right. It's
and then there's like an eyeball in the clouds, and it's more, just like a typical kind of book cover. Right.
The paper book that I have has, it's the same as the paper books that I have for the Great and Secret Show and the Hellbound Heart. It has this kind of like red and green border full of like circles and geometric forms.
Those are like early 2000s paperbacks, right?
No, 90s.
Oh, really?
They're from the 90s, yeah.
Okay.
Early 90s, and there's a picture of Hobart taken over by the Scourge in the middle of the cover, which is it's pretty cool.
Those are the first printings of not even the paperback, because the original paperbacks mostly just look like the original hardcovers.
Yeah. And I just found out, actually, that there's another 20th anniversary edition of Weaveworld that has the painting that I just described of Hobart containing Scourge. And they made that into the whole cover instead of just a part of the cover. They actually made a cover.
Wow. So that's instead of 25th, that would be the 20th anniversary. So
yeah.
That would have been, 2007 or something like that, maybe?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm going to send you these links right now so you can
that'll help.
Yeah, but so hang on. Help me out here.
Okay, so when Susanna gets caught, the fugue goes back to the Prophet, and Cal suddenly gets his memories back. Yeah, I mean, I think that and so anyway, it falls back into enemy hands. The Weave does, and the interesting thing here is that the enemies, which turns out to be Shadwell and Immaculata, actually found a really good place to put the fugue. It was in Scotland in a big empty pasture.
Yeah.
And I was kind of impressed. I was like, well, geez, why didn't Susanna and Jericho think of that?
Yeah, well, of course, this raises a bunch of little practical questions. Like, okay, I'm sure that property must belong to someone.
Yeah.
But you forgive that for the sake of the book.
Well, and ownership is nothing to somebody like Shadwell. He could easily find a buyer or figure out a way to get that. But
yeah. But this is going to be the place where, after the tragic events that are going to follow, Gluck will find a bunch of things there in Scotland, and he's going to put them in boxes.
Yeah.
And he's going to be really important in Book 3. But
so they open the fugue, and Shadwell, as this is a spoiler, but Shadwell turns out was the Prophet. He was wearing this skin that this sort of a fake goop that Immaculata made to transform him into this Prophet character. So Shadwell is leading this sort of righteous crusade against magic, or he goes in and he tries to talk to the House of Capra, right?
Yeah, but it's not even just humans that compose this righteous army. He even recruits some of the seer kind, right?
Yeah. And it's all about taking over the world and ruling the world, and he starts out as sort of a sham that Capra is speaking through him, who is, I guess, probably somebody that's long dead, and he doesn't fool the people in Capra's house. They're sort of the ruling democracy of the Weaveworld.
Yeah.
He doesn't fool them. So, a lot of bad stuff happens. There's a big war that kills lots of people in the fugue.
And here's a thing, which is, once the fugue is unwoven, there is, to the center of the fugue, the heart of the fugue, is composed by the gyre. The gyre is this bunch of roiling clouds that it's basically where the loom is located, because the fugue contained its own loom, and that's what actually makes the fugue weave itself into a carpet or whatever shape it decides.
And the gyre is kind of a maelstrom of clouds, and it's like darkness and lightning and
it's a very confusing place.
Yeah.
Because even the past and the present and the future kind of mix together in the center of the gyre or gyre.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think it's gyre.
Okay.
And the people who even the people who made it, they say, didn't really quite understand what it was that they unleashed or what they created.
Yeah. But in any case, the Prophet, what you were talking about, the big fight that ensues. And I think that the Prophet runs into the gyre at one point, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And Cal follows him, and it turns out to be Shadwell, of course.
Yeah.
So were they trying to destroy the fugue at this point? Shadwell is trying
Shadwell wanted to be in there because he thought that being a part of that or being there would make him like a god. But then when he figures out that he wanted the loom like something that he could possess because he's all into owning things.
Yeah.
And when it turned out that the loom wasn't a physical thing.
Right.
He was furious and he felt like he was tricked, and he decided that his new war was going to be against magic.
But then De Bono, if I recall correctly, also tells Cal, when they know that the Prophet is running towards the fugue, Geyer, that he says, Shadwell's going in there. And he says, yeah, Shadwell's going in, and you know what'll happen? The gyre will revolt. It will destroy itself. Yeah. And when it does, the fugue comes apart at the seams. So that's why they had to stop him.
Yeah, but it kind of turns out that just going in there isn't enough to destroy it. It's actually when you spill blood in the gyre.
Right.
Near the loom.
And that happens because Shadwell takes out a gun and he shoots Cal in the arm. And that's when everything kind of goes bad. And
he also stabs. I think he guts Immaculata.
Oh yeah.
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 So she dies in there.
Yeah. So, and basically what happens is that in order to save the fugue, I think that Cal and Susanna have to try to do something to save the fugue, but they don't really know what to do. The loom is just like an empty little house in the center of it, right?
Yeah, and by this time, Susanna has gotten her book back from Hobart.
Right.
And there was sort of an interesting exchange there where they both kind of went into the book and imagined themselves as a dragon and a knight, and they switched places, and sort of the theme of it is what can be imagined need never be lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so that plays an important part here, because as the gyre is tearing itself apart and the fugue is being destroyed, Susanna remembers that in her book, and she says, "Okay, Cal, you and I have to save the fugue, and so we need to remember."
Yeah.
And that from then until the very end of the book, it's just hinted that everyone else just feels that the fugue's been destroyed and it's gone forever, but they kind of have this secret together that maybe there's a slight chance that it's not gone.
That's something that they discover in time, I guess, and they keep it a secret.
Yeah,
they don't tell the remaining members of the tribes that the fugue has not been destroyed,
right,
because they're afraid that anybody will find out and then they'll go after them. But the book does contain, which of course is going to be a huge spoiler, the book does contain what's left of the fugue, what they could salvage from it before it completely destroyed itself.
Yeah.
But the loom is very beautiful. The chapter Into the Gyre. That's a really beautiful chapter because they're inside this little sanctum, the temple that holds the loom, and like you said, Shadwell spills blood in there because he kills Immaculata with a blade. But the loom does manifest itself at one point as this magical rapture with these bright ribbons that kind of contain all the stories and little things.
Yeah.
There's one of I'm not sure if this is mentioned as being one of Capra's tenets, but there is one phrase that they use, which is something like the if you can find the art to do it, the big can be contained within the small.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. I'm just paraphrasing here, but that's like from book one. That was something said.
And it's really that becomes a really interesting thing that we can talk about when we get to the ending here, but too, because that plays an important part in the very, very end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I guess that's the end of book 2. And then book 3, it starts out with Shadwell's quest to find the Scourge.
Oh yeah, book 3 is amazing. Book 3 begins with, like you said, they mention about the Rub al-Khali. The Rub al-Khali means the empty quarter in Bedouin language. And in the first book, you kind of get hints from Immaculata about her dreams that the Scourge is coming, that there's a huge emptiness where he dwells, and there's this huge, monstrous burning force that, is kind of still there, still alive. And he's also chasing the fugue. But the whole atmosphere of the beginning of book 3 is amazing. They go to this little village in the outskirts of the empty quarter, Shadwell and Hobart, and they find these guides that will take them on their journey there. But just the day before they're supposed, or the week before they're supposed to go, Shadwell eats something that wasn't good, and he starts getting terrible diarrhea and fever. And they start thinking, well, maybe it's time we should cancel this because you're not going to be strong enough to go in the trip into the empty quarter. And he's like, maybe. But in the middle of the night, one day he wakes up and he hears that there's like a sandstorm outside. And he hears this noise like a roaring voice that he thinks must be the Scourge. It must be the Scourge calling to him from the empty quarter. So he walks outside and he finds this old man. And he finds this old man, and he says, "What is this? What is this noise?" And the guy just says, "Al-Hiyal, Al-Hiyal," and then he spits on the floor and leaves. So the next day they get on camels and they go there to the empty quarter because he decides he needs to go there. At this point,
he's got Hobart with him as well.
Yeah, he's got Hobart with him, and Hobart at this point, after the events that happened in book 2. He's kind of a little traumatized, even more,
he's
even
traumatized
crazier.
And he's a little more dubious of his old way of thinking. He's not really like, okay, these are a bunch of anarchists, and I'm going to help him stop them. It's more like an uneasy feeling about magic. Shadwell wants to destroy magic because he feels like it tricked him. It's not something that he can possess, so he wants it gone. But Hobart feels like this is something I don't understand that can have power over me, and I hate it, and so that's why I'm going to go along with you.
There's also this duality in his belief now, which you would have to actually read the book. It's too complicated to get into it right now, but the whole thing about the Susanna's fairy tale books and tales of dragons, knights, and maidens, he kind of incorporated that and reinterpreted it in his own mind in a way that, he thinks there might be something behind it, some kind of or some kind of, he feels like there might be some kind of truth to that, and he wants to be the dragon. He wants to be the dragon because I think that he sees the dragon as a creature that is powerful and can destroy things with fire, I guess. Yeah. And he wants to purify the world. So he wants to be the dragon, and he wants to meet the dragon, which is the Scourge. That's how Shadwell describes the Scourge to him. Yeah. Like it's this dragon who's going to clean the world of magic.
Well, and Shadwell is very persuasive and manipulative. So, I mean, he uses Hobart's weakness.
And at this point, Shadwell has lost the jacket, so he doesn't have the jacket anymore.
Yeah, he threw it down because he hates magic now so much that it's like, I don't want this anymore. I'm no longer a salesman.
And the jacket held those raptures, and they're going to be really handy further ahead in the story. Yeah. But at this moment, Shadwell's just being himself. It's just his charismatic salesman personality. He's using it, and he can still get things done with that. But so they get on the desert. They start walking towards the empty quarter on camel, and they have a really hard time getting there. And there's nothing at the empty quarter. Really, there's really nothing, and nothing but sand.
Yeah, until they hear the howl again.
And they hear the howl again one night, and Shadwell is like a man possessed, actually. He just keeps going. In the beginning, the guides are the ones moving ahead, but then after a while, Shadwell starts taking the lead because he's like following his own instinct. He's like following the voice of the Scourge that's calling out to him. So,
yeah.
Ultimately, they come to this point, which it's just dune upon dune, giant dunes they have to climb, and. But then once they climb the final wave of dunes, then they come across an even more astonishing view, is that all of a sudden the dunes disappear and there's nothing but a huge plain where they really cannot see the end of it. And they just keep going. They just keep going, and then ultimately they start to notice that there's something in the distance, and it looks like a bunch of mountains, but it turns out it's a huge wall. And this is really like reading this, just talking about it doesn't really make it justice to the whole ambience of this chapter. It's out of the Empty Quarter, The Search for the Scourge is just an amazing chapter.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite moments in the book. And they walk and walk and walk, and they finally touch the wall. And the wall is something incredible, something fantastic, because it doesn't seem to be made out of stones. It just seems to be a huge wall of rock, and it's so smooth that he touches it and he feels smooth. He can't even feel anything. He almost can't feel the whole texture of the rock because it's so smooth. Mm-hmm. And
it said it felt like somebody had crafted the wall out of pure magma, because it was just one solid piece that went on for as far as your eyes could see.
And it was silky. It was silky to the touch because it was so smooth. Yeah. And ultimately, they
50 feet tall.
Yeah, they feel the wind and the sand lapping at their feet, and they discover that the wind has an origin. And they discover that the wind comes from this broken section of the wall, and the howling and the wind comes out of there with sand. And they discover there's a huge part of the wall that just crumbled down. So they climb on that. They go into the wall, and what's on the other side? It's nothing. It's nothing as far as the eye could see again. And it's like they feel a little disheartened, I guess, and they're like, But Shadwell still thinks there's something to it, because he climbs up on the wall and he sees kind of like lines, like an architecture. He sees like some markings on the floor on that empty quarter that's beyond the wall. And they compare this, Clive compares this at this moment like some of those lines that were in the South American desert. Mm-hmm. And I think here he's talking about the Nazca lines in Peru. Have you ever heard of the Nazca lines?
No.
It's these lines in the middle of the desert that were made by a tribe of Peruvian people who disappeared.
Right. And you said they only make sense when you look at them from above, from up in the sky.
Right.
Yeah.
So he thinks that there might be something there, and he decides to camp inside the walls overnight. And it turns out that their hunch was really good, because they do find something else that night when they wake up in the middle of the night, right?
Yeah. So it turns out that he sees like a jungle, like a forest. And the closer he gets, he's like, well, wait a minute, this has no color. And he touches it, and it's all shaped out of sand.
Yeah.
Just sort of being held up in place by magic, which, since it's magic, freaks out Shadwell, and he goes nuts and starts beating up the flowers and the trees and knocking them down. Yeah,
I think it's more also not just because it's magic, but also because it's a fake. Yeah. And he kind of gets angry that it's fake, and it's like, he gets frustrated that all of this stuff is just sand, and and he hears a shout. He hears some noise because his guides have disappeared, and I'm not entirely sure if they wake up in the middle of the night because they hear some kind of noise, or it's just because they just wake up. But they're trying to find their guides, and eventually what they find is the Scourge.
Yeah, it shows up, and Hobart craps his pants.
Yeah. It's this giant creature.
Yeah, it's something like 15 feet tall, and it has two columns of eyes down a long, like slender, ivory-looking head that's like a big oval with eyeballs all over it.
Yeah, when I visualize it, I think of it more as a chaotic, like, patch of eyes on each side.
And it's not exactly 100% fixed, so it's kind of hard to picture because it changes.
Yeah,
and it has wheels of fire that are moving inside of it. That's also kind of hard to imagine as well.
Yeah, it's like its heart is like this furnace or something, and it's a huge creature. But then it can change its size at will because I guess when it's like protective and angry, it becomes large and tall. But then when it wants to just relax and look at the stars, he just like diminishes in stature.
Yeah.
And I always imagine this part of the book as him becoming really big and like what's the word I'm trying to come up with? Large and bulky, like with monstrous arms and legs.
Yeah.
But then when he changes size, he becomes more human-like. I always imagine his body becoming more of natural shapes and forms, and so he sits on top of this sand throne or hill, looking at the sky for a while, and they start talking to him, I think, and what he does is he opens up the sands and brings up his guides, who have been horribly killed and mutilated.
Yeah.
Because apparently the guides were this guy called Ibn Talak and another kid. And it turns out that their relationship is not it's not that normal or pure, I would say. It's more like it's a 14 or 15-year-old boy and his lover. Yeah. And what they do is, while Shadwell and Hobart were sleeping, they sneaked away in the night, and they were like, doing it in the middle of the garden.
Yeah, and so the Uriel, the scourge, saw that as a kind of a transgression, and burned them, and not like quick and painless. It was, it was burning off their hands and their feet and their groins and
the offending parts.
Yeah.
So they die terribly, and he shows this as a vision to Shadwell, and it's really gruesome because he kind of like talks to Shadwell through his mind.
And I think Shadwell throws up right when he sees them.
Yeah. He wakes up after the vision, and he kind of like threw up in there.
Yeah.
But so after this vision of what the Scourge did to his guides, he decides, Shadwell decides to tell him about the seer kind, that they're out there, they're still alive, and that he needs his help to destroy them, and that he knows that he wants to destroy them. So he's like, so I'm telling you, they're out there, and we can destroy them. And he says, okay, I think I will take a different shape this time. And he ends up taking possession of Hobart.
Yeah, and it's like these beams of light sort of pierce through Hobart and take over his body. Yeah,
he kind of disappears into Hobart, and
and he's like, "So, how do you like it now? You're the dragon."
Yeah, and I think at this moment he doesn't even realize what really happened to him and how much of a pawn he's just become.
Yeah,
but it's like he becomes a mix of the two entities. He becomes Hobart and the Scourge at the same time.
Yeah.
And what happens here also is that the Scourge tells Shadwell about how the seer kind came to be and who he thinks he was, because we will find out later that what the Scourge says might not be entirely accurate. But he says that he was the guardian of Eden. He was Uriel. He was set there to guard the gates. And the sand that composed that garden was kind of like a memory of what the garden used to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and he and the problem was that the the families, the well, not cuckoos. What do you call them? The seer kind.
Yeah.
The seer kind were creatures. They were the people that inhabited Eden, and they're not supposed to escape. Even though Eden is gone, and there's really no reason for them to be living there. But this creature is sort of half mad, and all it remembers is its purpose is to guard the gates and not let things get out. And the seer kind have already gotten out.
Yeah, it's weird because he says that the Garden of Eden that he guarded was a place where things came into being, into the world. It was a place of creation. But then he kind of also hints that the seer kind were droppings from some higher power. Yeah. They weren't actually created for a purpose. They kind of accidentally got created in there.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like we get a proper a proper reason for the creation of the seer kind. It's more like they just happen to little accidents, I guess.
Yeah. And it's kind of like the pigeon and Teresa, right, where the angel accidentally made the tortoise and the parrot, self-aware and intelligent animals, and it's like, oh God, it's time to correct this mistake. And so Uriel, in a way, kind of sees that, maybe sees that as part of his purpose too, is to destroy these creatures that aren't supposed to be out in the world.
Yeah. So he claims that he had been there, lost in the empty quarter for so long that he had forgotten about the seer kind, but Shadwell reminds him of that. And the last time that he had actually killed some seer kind was in the Rock of the First Fatalities, which actually was put into the fugue back in 1896. So it's been almost 100 years. It's been 80 years because we're in like 1986 or 7 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he asks the Scourge at one moment, "What about Adam and Eve?" And the Uriel just says, "I don't remember them." Yeah. And then he says, "The first parents of humanity," and he says something like, "Humanity was raised from dirt in 1,000 places, but not here. Here were the higher spirits."
Yeah. Yeah,
so it's kind of mysterious.
That's really kind of cool, and that's something I've always loved, is that, Clive Barker appreciates the Bible, but he the way he interprets it for his stories is so different from traditional thinking. Even though, again,
this is not entirely accurate what the Scourge says.
The Scourge doesn't understand itself, so it probably doesn't. But I think the overall idea behind this, the truth of this, is that there was something that fostered the myth of Eden, and this creature was probably tied to it somehow.
Well, what they say further ahead, and this is still in Book 3, is that the Scourge had read the Bible at one point.
It had read it out of the mind of one of the people that it found, that had come to it, yeah.
And that's when it kind of like decided that it fit his life or his purpose so well that he must be an angel, and he was Uriel, and he guarded Eden.
And the person that gives this information out is Immaculata, because she's dead, and now she's sort of part of the universal knowledge of or she has she's lost all of her malice and bad will and is kind of giving her wisdom from the grave.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. Because of course the action moves away from the empty quarter after Shadwell departs the empty quarter with Hobart Scourge.
Yeah.
But then they go to Cal, and Cal thinks that his life is returning to normal, and he even gets to reunite with Geraldine, and he's trying to live life, deal with what happened to him. I guess other people are also trying to deal with what happened and about the fugue and all that. Mm-hmm. They're trying to come to terms with it. And
the seer kind, they have contacted Susanna here and there, and she's like living her own life, and she's doing her pottery. And then all of a sudden, everybody starts having nightmares.
Yeah, and
and they remember that's the way that the scourge made its appearance the first time, or the last time, was that it was preceded by nightmares, and Cal had nightmares, the seer kind had nightmares. Susanna is like, well, I haven't had any nightmares, and then they look at her pottery that she's been doing, and it's all these burned and twisted seer kind. And she didn't even ever stop and look at him or realize what she'd been making.
Yeah, because they do mention at one point that she stops making pottery and starts going into more figurative work.
Yeah.
And starts making these little sculptures. And Apolline, I think, is the one that says, "You've been dreaming with your eyes open."
Yeah, which is really cool. I thought that was a neat touch, because none of, we were always, I think you're right there along for the ride, and there's nothing really predictable. Because it's been a long time since I've read this book, but I didn't remember that until I realized right with with Susanna that she's been sculpting these, been sculpting these dead seer kind as a kind of a her waking dream.
Yeah, and so at this point in the story, there's only like 100 seer kind left from the four families.
Yeah, which is really sad. I mean, that's, I think, one thing you can say about Clive Barker books is that he builds a world that you sort of fall in love with, and then he rips it apart.
Yeah, well, in the case of like the Imagica, he kind of makes it bigger.
Well, yeah, that's true.
He reunites it,
right, and clean, and it's cleansed of the evil.
Yeah.
So that's a little different, isn't it?
I never really understood here, and I think Clive lets it a little open-ended in the end, because we know that the fugue is not entirely destroyed.
Right.
Even though after Shadwell spilled blood in the gyre, and the fugue started disassembling itself and all that. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we forgot to mention a very important thing, which is in the middle of that roiling confusion of the gyre and the loom and Shadwell and Cal and the dissolution of the gyre, there's a moment where Cal walks into this little house that exists near the gyre, and he meets up with an old version. What at the time I thought he might have been like Mad Mooney, and I thought they were going to be like, oh, okay, this old dude that looks like Cal, maybe he's like Mad Mooney, and Mad Mooney was also like a seer kind. But no, it turns out that he's meeting himself in the future. Like I said, the gyre really mixes up everything in that area because it's a state of flux or whatever.
And near the end of the story, Cal comes to this realization, wait a minute, if I lived in the gyre, I lived in a house near the gyre, as an old man, that means that the fugue can come back.
Yeah.
And that realization was really neat. I mean, because you come to that and you go, yeah, geez, why didn't I think of that?
And again, it goes back to the theme, that which is imagined need never be lost.
Yeah, and imagination being so important to this whole story.
Exactly. And then that's when the fugue comes pouring out at the end from the book that Susanna has. But what I was going to say is that we are told that there's only like 100 seer kind left.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure if that's never mentioned, but if there were more seer kind
in the memory of the fugue that they lay back out. Yeah. It feels like there are, doesn't it?
I would like to believe so, and I think I will believe that there were more.
Yeah.
Because I would hate to think that the seer kind get almost exterminated like that.
Yeah.
But I would like to believe at the end of the book that there were more seer kind that spring back to life once the fugue is unwoven again. But we're jumping way ahead of it. So they get these nightmares, and Cal is trying to find Susanna because they decided that they would stay away from contacting each other for security reasons. Mm-hmm. And I think Susanna has the book.
Yeah, and Susanna's been in contact with the remaining seer kind, and they all decide, okay, there is a place where there was, and I don't quite get this, but there was a place where the angel couldn't see us in the past, and it was called Raymond Hill. So we're all going to go there. And
it was a place where he didn't approach it, I think.
Yeah.
he wouldn't set foot on it.
Yeah, and we don't really get a good explanation of why that is.
Right.
Yeah.
But before that, the meeting that they all meet up, and Susanna's there, and they talk about what are we going to do now? Because the whole story between the unwoven, the destruction of the fugue until this moment, it takes place like a few seasons have passed.
Yeah.
Like spring became summer, summer became autumn, autumn is becoming winter. And this happens parallel to the story where Shadwell goes into the empty quarter. So right now it's like the end of autumn,
and Cal's become a baker. He's lost his job as an insurance worker, and he's become a baker, which he likes a lot more.
Yeah, it gave him biceps of steel.
Yeah, and he gets fresh bread for breakfast every morning.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
But so when Susanna is in that reunion of the remaining breed, they really can't find a consensus to do anything because a lot of finger pointing is being made, and I think it's the guy called I forgot his name.
Harvey Gluck?
No, Gluck is not a seer kind.
Oh,
it's that guy who wants to. Hang on, I'm trying to find the name. It starts with an H. It's not Harlem. It's there's so many names here. Well, De Bono is like their chief at this moment. De Bono is like
you're talking about the one who there's the one guy that wants to kill Shadwell. And he's like the leader of the faction that wants to go kill Shadwell and get revenge.
Revenge, yes.
Yeah, Hamill, that's his name.
Hamill. Yes, H-A-M-E-L. Hamill.
Yeah, like Mark Hamill.
Yeah, so they can't really get in any consensus, and the assembly kind of falls into confusion and confrontation. And at one point, they even tell Susanna, "And what are you doing here? You're a cuckoo. You're not."
So there's some of them that don't appreciate her.
So when they come back, they meet up back with Susanna after a few weeks or months have gone by. It's Apolline, and she's been having the nightmares, and everyone's been having the nightmares. And this time they say, well, the Scourge is coming back. So everybody's like, oh, great. Now that the fugue has been destroyed, we're down in our numbers, and the Scourge is coming to finish the job. Mm-hmm. So what should they do? Yeah. And they decide that it's best if they just confront the Scourge, and at least they will all be together near the end.
Yeah,
because
And Raymond Hill would because it confuses it, or it doesn't like Raymond Hill, or it couldn't see them on Raymond Hill in the past, that would buy them some time, and maybe they could figure out something while they're up there.
Yeah, maybe they can figure out a way to harness and use the old science to defeat it, because apparently that's what they used the last time. They managed to confuse him with the old science, and I guess he just went back into the empty quarter and kind of stayed there while they did the fugue. Of course, they hid from him, of course, but they managed to use the old science to escape him. So what they do is Cal meets up with some of the seer kind, and he's been having these terrible dreams about the Scourge coming over to his house or Mimi Leszczynski's house, and he's like naked, and there's like this huge sun outside, which is the Scourge, and it burns him, and he wakes up and he's always like terribly his body's racked with spasms and sweat and fever and stuff. So finally he meets up with the seer kind because he goes back to Mimi Leszczynski's house because he's trying to find some clue as how to reconnect back with the seer kind and Susanna. And what happens is that a party of seer kind go to Mimi Leszczynski's house to try to figure out a way that they could like tap into the memories of the fugue that were there, and maybe
in the floorboards where the carpet had laid for so many years.
Yeah, maybe they could scratch some bit of old science from there, and actually it starts to work. They do. It's De Bono. He goes there with a few other seer kind, and they do walk into Mimi Leszczynski's house, and they kind of they feel something there, but they have to rip out the carpets and push away the furniture. And then they do manage to touch the floorboards where the carpet laid for all those years. And they feel some of the old science is still there. They can still tap into that reserve of power. But it's a ritual that takes a lot of time and energy and patience.
And DeBono has left to take a break or something like that. And when he does, he sees two figures headed up the stairs.
Yeah, and he goes out of the room. He sees, at first he thinks it's just another couple of Seerkind that were also, taking a break. But then he realizes the fire inside Hobart, and he goes oh, no, it's the Scourge. And the next thing he knows, those guys have ran into the room, and fire starts exploding inside the room. And
when it hits them, one of them flies out the window and burns into nothingness, in the air. And another one gets burned so that it flies up and gets pinned to the ceiling while it's getting burned. So it's sort of the fire is kind of like this light that eats away at you.
Them.
Yeah.
It consumes them and burns them, and he kind of manages to get away, but he's burned himself. He's burned pretty bad, but he manages to run, and I think he goes to Cal's house, right?
Yeah. He doesn't know what else to do, so he goes to Cal. And Cal and DeBono have to escape from the Scourge, and in the meantime, this snowstorm has started, and there's a cloud all around their neighborhood, and nobody can see anything or where they're going, and that ends up being, I think, how DeBono and Cal are able to escape.
Yeah, that cloud thing is kind of the way they explain it is that Chariot Street had become separated from the rest of the world. It's kind of something that follows the Scourge, I think, because that happens as well in Raymond's Hill when the Scourge goes there. And there's this mist that kind of surrounds the Scourge in the area that he's influencing, I guess.
Yeah, or hunting. Yeah.
Or hunting. And so they try to escape by car, but of course the Scourge gets them.
He blows up the car and it flips over.
Yeah.
On its side.
The only thing that he has the time to do is run through the streets until he walks into his own house, grabs his wallet and a few things, and bolts out again.
And Susanna's book.
In Susanna's book. Yeah. And just as he bolts out, he hears a roar of the Scourge and his house exploding or something.
Yeah.
So,
and there's nothing left of it.
Yeah. So basically, Mimi Leszczynski's house and Cal's house are destroyed. And again, this calls the attention of a lot of people, and Susanna is trying to reconnect with Cal too, I think, at this moment. So she decides...
She ended up going with them to Raymond Hill because she went to the house and there was nothing there but a crater, and it's well, God, I hope he's not dead.
Right.
And then so she goes with the rest of them to Raymond Hill. Yeah,
she follows the Seerkind to Raymond Hill, while Cal is trying to get in touch with her, but he has no idea where to get in touch with her.
So the next person he thinks of is Gluck.
Gluck.
Yeah.
Virgil Gluck. And he's trying to find clues in Gluck's archives that might tell him where the Seerkind might be located at, because he knows that there are Seerkind left. And he tells the whole story to Virgil Gluck. He decides, Gluck, it's me. He's been trying to contact him for days, but he's like, Gluck, I need to talk to you. It's an emergency. It's okay, well, you know where my house is. Come over and we'll talk. So he goes there and he's trying to figure out a way to explain to him what's going on. And he ends up sitting down and telling him the whole story. And Gluck has this kind of weird reaction where he's like, okay, well, do you want some tea? And he's like, you don't believe me. And he says, well, Mooney, it's you're talking to a man who just got all his beliefs destroyed. Yeah. So you'll have to give me a moment until I can stomach this whole thing.
Yeah.
But he ultimately believes him. He actually says, there is this bunch of crates that I was just in Scotland gathering these artifacts that we found in a place where I think your fugue might have been. And he opens up one of the boxes and there's a jacket there. And it's Shadwell's jacket.
Yeah, and he didn't realize, he's like, holy crap, this is Shadwell's jacket? And he goes, what, really, that? Because it looks plain and it doesn't look like, when it's not worn by somebody, it just looks like a boring old jacket. And even when you look at the the lining. There's really nothing special about it.
Yeah, and so I think that Cal is actually repelled because I guess not just because of the memories of Shadwell, but also because he thinks like, oh, that's one of those magical things. But it seems like there's no special glow to the lining of the jacket anymore, and he doesn't want to touch it even. He's like, I don't want it. That was Shadwell's. I don't want it. Gluck is like, no, but you should take it.
Yeah,
you know?
He packs it up in a box and lets Cal borrow one of his cars. And they figure out Raymond Hill. And I can't remember how or why they figure that out.
Well, it's Cal just he figures it out
from
after
his memory.
Sleeping, yeah, because when the 5 seer kind came into existence from the tiny bit of carpet, and they woke Cal and Susanna, they were talking about the kingdom and how it looked different and this and that, and maybe that the Scourge was still out there. And he remembers while he's sleeping, he has like a vision in his sleep. He goes back to that moment where he wakes up and sees the Seerkind there. And he remembers, I think it was Apolline or something, telling Celia Policia about the Scourge never approaching this hill. Yeah. And one of them is like, do you remember the name of the hill? And he's like, yeah, go ahead and tell her, because he's also trying to remember. And then
as he's waking up and he's fighting to stay asleep.
Yeah.
Because she's just about to say the name, and finally she says it right before he wakes up.
Raymond's Hill. And he gets up, he says, Raymond's Hill, that's where they probably are. And he runs over, he wakes Virgil up and says, I think I know where they are. And, okay, that's when they set up that little expedition. But he tells Virgil Gluck, listen, I don't think you can come with me because...
That's and that's a heartbreaking moment.
Yeah.
I think it's what Virgil's has been looking forward to for his whole life.
Yeah.
And Cal says, I'm sorry, I got to go by myself, and I need to borrow your car.
Yes.
He's like, oh, I guess, okay.
Because he thinks that the Seerkind would not take kindly to him taking a stranger into their midst while they're hiding.
I think maybe some of them wouldn't, but, honestly, they probably, they've got bigger things to worry about.
And so Cal makes his way to Raymond's Hill, which is, of course, an isolated hill. He has a hard time going there because now it's winter and everything is snowed in and roads are snowed in.
And we talked about this last episode that there's Clive's got he has an impressive knowledge of English roadways, and he talks about this one, he had to detour to this one because this one was closed, and then this one had a fatal accident, and this one, was more residential, and it took him longer and stuff and there were snowdrifts on this one that were, really tall, and just a lot of geographical, stuff that I'm sure people from the UK really appreciate.
Yeah. But anyway, he finally makes it to this road that doesn't really have an end, and he has to continue on foot. And so
the car's wheels were spinning, and he just couldn't get it to go any farther.
It's really funny that the way that he finds to protect himself against the cold is that he finds like creative files from Gluck in the back of the car, so he just stuffs it down his pants. Cardboard, paper, pictures, newspapers. He just stuffs his clothes full of it, and he starts trudging through the snow.
In Alaska, that's called Tuesday.
Good one.
Except our cars would be 4-wheel drive.
Life below zero.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like, he's not even sure if he's going the right direction at one moment, and he starts getting like his clothes are all wet, and his muscles are starting to ache, and just as he's in the verge of on the verge of like passing out from the cold, he's like, well, he wanted to sleep and take a nap and lay on this nice snow and stuff. He sees a monkey in the middle of the sand, in the middle of the snow. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what is that monkey's name? He's the talking monkey that was in the orchard.
Novello,
that's right.
Yeah, he sees a monkey, and he's like, is that a monkey?
Yeah.
He's like...
And it runs, it appears out of nowhere, and it runs around and plays, and then it disappears again.
Yeah, because he only sees nothing but snow in front of him, and he's like, he knew that there was a wood at the bottom of Raymond's Hill, but he sees a hill, but he doesn't see a wood. And he's like walking around, and it's like nothing but snow, and he thinks, well, I'm just about ready to give up and lay down and die. When he sees the monkey, and then something in front of him says, step forward a couple of times and, move sideways. And he does that, and someone's arm just comes out of the whiteness and pulls him in.
Yeah.
And it turns out that there was this huge rapture being practiced over the wood, and it would just disguise the wood into not being there. And so he would only see, like, standing right in front of it, he would see nothing but snow and snow and snow, but he wouldn't see the wood. Then he finds out that they're the seer kind. They're all gathered there. Mm-hmm. And, basically they don't recognize Cal at first, I think. They just think he's like this drifting person that they just rescued from dying in the cold.
Clive Barker just posted some Weaveworld art on Facebook.
Oh, awesome.
Like 10 minutes ago. I just there's the link to it.
And so Cal is given some coffee, and he's given some fresh clothes, and he finds out that Suzanne is there. So they reconnect, and he tells them that the Scourge is on the way. They say, we know, yeah, we know. We're just trying to figure out a way to, escape him again so he can pass us by. Mm-hmm. If not, then they're ready to die together. And just as they're saying this, they hear this rumbling around them, and they go to the edge of the rapture that's hiding the wood, and they see Shadwell and Hobart, and they made it to Raymond's Hill.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure how they decide to go there, though. Do you remember, or is it just the Scourge that?
I don't know. They just always seem to know where to go. Like they went to, Mimi's house, and they went to Cal's house. And they also we forgot to mention that the Scourge and Hobart also visit the Shrine of Fatalities. Right, where Immaculata's ghost was.
Yeah, because they were destroying every place that had like remnants of magic in it.
Yeah,
and
actually that was an important place for Hobart because, it's a normal church upstairs. So as they're going through, Shadwell's saying, "Get out of my way, or you're gonna die," and Hobart's like, "No, please don't make me do this," and Uriel is burning these priests to death. He killed 2 of them, and one of them, Shadwell put his hands over his mouth to stop the fire and burned his hands off.
Yeah, because Hobart understands the Scourge wants to destroy the church because there's power inside. And he thinks, well, this is still a church because Hobart is, a pretty Catholic.
Well, it's interesting because they said it's a strange thing because Hobart has sort of started to feel a little religious, where his only religion before was the law.
Yeah, I guess that's still ingrained in his personality.
Yeah,
and he doesn't want to allow the Scourge to destroy the church or kill the priests. In fact, there's one moment where he kind of like grabs his own head and knocks it against the wall a couple times.
Yeah.
Before he puts his hands in front of his face to stop the onslaught of the Scourge's fire from killing
and the Scourge is kind of deceitful. I mean, it's like it says to him, "Oh, you're with me forever, and don't fret, or don't worry, everything will be fine."
He's starting to learn from Shadwell.
Yeah.
In fact, it mentions in the book that he's actually using the same tone as a salesman.
Yeah.
To talk to Hobart, because he's doing his best to use Hobart's body as a hiding.
Yeah, for as long as he can keep it alive.
Anyway, they make it to Raven's Hill,
mm-hmm.
and the rapture that is holding the woods away from being revealed is kind of like fading, and
they just can't hold it up any longer. It's taking too much effort,
and so they're like sniffing the air, and they're like the Scourge says something like, "I smell them." Mm-hmm. And they're like, okay, well, our only chance, then Cal realizes that their only chance is the jacket that Gluck told him that he had packed in with some cigars and other artifacts that he found in Scotland.
Yeah.
And he left the jacket and the package back in the car before he started his trudge towards Raymond's Hill. So he decides to go with Nimrod, I think,
to
the car to get the jacket. So they need to slide out of the rapture of the hiding spot, go through the snow without being seen by Shadwell and Hobart, all the way to the car, get the jacket, and come back. Of course, a little way ahead of, coming out of the woods, Shadwell says, "I see you."
Yeah.
And
Susanna's like, "Oh God, I gotta help," and so she runs out and tries to and starts distracting them.
Yeah, she starts distracting the Scourge. At this moment, the Scourge is kind of like spacing out a little bit because I think that the snow reminds him of the sand of the empty quarter.
And he feels like he's back in the empty quarter, and he sort of shuts down. It's like he goes into sleep mode.
Yeah, he starts sitting on the floor, and at this moment he's like naked. Hobart is like naked because his clothes have been consumed by the fire of the Scourge.
Yeah.
And he definitely sees Susanna, and he sees her, and he starts focusing on her. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I see you. All right, so what's going on here? And he's kind of slowly coming out of his gaze, I guess. And
and Shadwell feels like, Susanna's just condemned herself to death, so I can talk to her, I can tell her anything I want because there's no way she's going to get away from here alive. Yeah,
but the same time, why is the Scourge so interested in Susanna is because it's Hobart.
Yeah,
Hobart is inside the Scourge.
And Hobart feels this connection to her that they shared through her book.
Yeah, and the Scourge is still kind of like spacing out a little bit, and Shadwell is like trying to scream at him, saying, "Look, they're there. They're hiding, but they're there. I saw them. You got to kill them, burn them all." Yeah. And he's just staring intently at Susanna.
Yeah.
And he's like, Hobart emerges, and he tries to ask Susanna to help him, and the way he does that is he offers his neck.
Yeah, he leans his head back and looks up, and it's the same motion that he did when he was the dragon in their shared world inside of the book. So
right.
when he was the dragon, he was saying, "Kill me," and now he's doing it again, and this time she didn't hesitate.
Right, but it doesn't really kill the Scourge, right? I mean, it doesn't really do much.
No, it's really for Hobart.
Yeah, and actually, the Scourge kind of like drips out of Hobart, and Hobart falls to the ground dead. And Shadwell's like,
she had reached
I can't believe it.
Strand of her menstruum into his chest and squeezed his heart until he died.
Yeah, and Shadwell's like, I can't believe it. You killed the Scourge. Well, what did you do? I mean, and it turns out that it's a very anticlimactic scene, but it turns out, of course, that the Scourge didn't die. The Scourge just abandoned Hobart's body and went into the ground, and then Susanna tells Shadwell, well, now there's just you and me here, and guess what? I'm corrupted with magic, and your body's clean, so guess
where it's going to go, and he freaks out.
And he says he wouldn't dare. Yeah. I mean, I helped him out.
Yeah. And then when it chases him down, he's like, I wouldn't dare, would I? I wouldn't dare.
Yeah, basically the Scourge has gone into the ground, and he starts shaking the ground, and the Raymond's Hill kind of tips on its side, and it's this huge earthquake thing that happens. Yeah. And they're sent flying in the air, and they fall in the middle of the gravel and the dirt. In the meantime, of course, the seer kind are in the wood, and I think at this moment their rapture is gone, and basically they're just trying to escape. And Cal and Nimrod do find the jacket, and while the Scourge is getting ready to burn all the seer kind after taking over.
And actually Gluck came back too.
Yeah. Well, they find Gluck also. The Nimrod and Cal kind of rescue Gluck from the snow. He was also like lost in the snow. He said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. I had to follow you."
Which is kind of a relief because I felt really sad for him when he didn't get to come along.
Yeah, and so of course Shadwell is taken over by the Scourge, and he's getting ready to burn the seer kind. When all of a sudden, from the top of a hill, Cal shows up wearing the jacket, and he's like, "Hey, he gets the attention of the Scourge, and he opens up the jacket, and he's like, "Hey, see anything you like?"
And at this point, Shadwell is yelling at the Scourge like, it's all filthy magic, it's just tricks, it's a sham, don't look at it. And,
right.
But even though they're in the same body, Uriel's not listening to him and is looking in the jacket anyway.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when Scourge was, before he went to Raymond's Hill and he destroyed Immaculata's shrine, Immaculata told him something, told the Scourge something. He said, well, just look at yourself. You're not an angel. You're not Uriel. You didn't guard the gates of paradise. You've just forgotten yourself. You don't even know who you are anymore. Well, you look at yourself, and that's when the Scourge gets really angry and says, I will not, and he burns away Immaculata's ghost.
Yeah.
And he burns away all the shrine. And it's because he is in self-denial, isn't he? I mean, Uriel is in denial. He just became obsessed so long about destroying the magic and the seer kind that escaped his garden that he doesn't even know who he is anymore and what his duty is. He just has this weird sense of duty, but that is, his purpose has been perverted because he became obsessed about killing the seer kind and destroying the magic.
Yeah, and as he's looking in the jacket, what he wants the most is starting to appear, and it's taking a huge toll on the jacket, and it's pulling all the energy out of the jacket, and the jacket's starting to literally come apart at the seams, and it's also pulling energy out of Cal. Yeah,
Cal is feeling the drain of his energy, and also he's starting to feel like this rapport with the Scourge.
Right, and he feels what it felt being alone and insane in the desert.
He feels the emptiness of it, and it kind of like swallows like Cal's personality. Yeah. But he still stands there, and the jacket, even though it pretty much has disappeared from Cal's body, it kind of transforms into this huge form that finally crystallizes what the Scourge is trying to see. And he's trying to look at himself. Yeah. So it's creating this other ghostly figure of the Scourge.
And even though it wasn't a real being like him, that image was enough to make the creature remember itself.
Yeah, it remembers itself. It remembers its own shape when it was pure and when it was sane, I guess. When it was... It remembers its higher purpose, and it remembers where it came from and who he really was.
Yeah.
And so as soon as he remembers that, he just
flies off into the stars. He didn't stop to apologize to the
yeah, that's true.
That would have been nice if he'd said sorry, to the seer kind, but
yeah. But at that moment, I guess his obsession and his insanity is cured.
Yeah.
And he just realizes who he was, and he just moves into the stars.
And it also explodes out of Shadwell's body. So yeah. Shadwell is gone. I mean, he's basically...
Yeah, he started bloating when the Scourge was revealing his true form. He started bloating and stretching until he just became like a bunch of like burned ribbons of flesh that disappeared. So that's it. And, he just disappears, and they find their way into victory, and the Scourge is not going to threaten them anymore. So now what's next for the seer kind? They're going to Disney World.
Yeah, so the seer kind sort of make their way in the world and figure out, a life, and but in the meantime, Cal has gone into a coma. He's in, but it's not exactly a coma. It's more of a fugue state. So even when he wakes up, he's not really woken up. In his mind, he's in this dark void, just sort of wandering around and not feeling a sense of purpose.
Yeah, Susanna is taking care of him,
and Gluck.
And Gluck.
Yeah.
And he just sits there every day, like his eyes are open, but he's not really responsive or anything. Which again reminds me a bit of Imagica, right? I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Imagica, where the moment where Gentle is taken over by that those magic fish that climb into his throat, and he sits there every day paralyzed. But ultimately, he finds his way back because he sees out of the emptiness, he sees this face one day, and he sees this face staring back at him, and he kind of like raises his arm to touch that face of that person he doesn't know who he is. And he touches it, and he touches a mirror. And that's when he realizes that that face is me.
Yeah,
you know?
And that was the old man that he saw living in the little house on the edge of the fugue.
Yeah.
So then he comes to the realization, which I thought was really cool, because I didn't think of that either, that if that old man is alive and living in near the fugue, or near the gyre in the fugue, then that means the fugue comes back.
Right.
And that realization gives Cal purpose, and that's when he can come out of his, I guess, fugue state. I hate to say that, but no pun intended.
Yeah.
But
and Susanna comes home after buying some groceries or something, and she sees that Cal's hands are in a different spot where they used to be.
And it's kind of like, wait, did he really do that? Did his hand just fall down, or did I just imagine it?
And then he kind of says her name, I think, and and she holds him, she helps him up because he's really weak now. I mean, they have been doing exercises to keep his legs from becoming too weak and all that because he didn't really move. He was just kind of in a coma. And he stands up like trembling, and he goes like, "Where's the book?" And we have to open the book. We have to release it.
Yeah,
and she's like, "Right now."
And they run past like Gluck, and he like throws his tea up in the air.
Yeah, and they grab hold of the book, and of course they bring back the fugue into existence.
Yeah,
that's this whole. We just mentioned this
in the backyard of right. I mean, they call it the garden, but it's like in their backyard. So it's kind of like the large space is contained in something small.
Yeah, it was emerging from the book's scattered pages in all its singular majesty, defying ice and darkness as it had defied so much else. The months it had spent among the tales in the book had not been wasted. It came with fresh mysteries and enchantments. And then, of course, it says, here in time, Susanna would rediscover the old science, and with it heal ancient breaches. Here, too, in some unimaginable year, Cal would go to live in a house on the borders of the gyre, to which one day a young man would come, whose history he knew. It was all ahead, all they dreamed together, all waiting to be born. So, and then we kind of get the feeling that all across England and all across any place where the seer kind were hiding, that they suddenly all wake up and raise their heads from their pillows, and they feel that something's happened and that the fugue is back. And
it's a really happy ending, which is nice.
Yeah, it hints that Wonderland would not be another world, but it would become part of the world, and that this world would become a place of magic again.
And I think because it's all contained within that backyard there, that it's not going to intrude on other people's property and become a thing that gets everybody's attention.
I think that what's hinted here is that the world would change. I mean, it had to, because they would have this miraculous thing in its midst, and people would have to reconsider, the way they see the world now. I mean, because there is magic, it's real. And so if tomorrow, you saw on CNN that this Wonderland had appeared with creatures who could sing things into being, people would either consider them to be angels or demons or, something else. But definitely they would reconsider what is possible and what is not. And the reason why I also think that some of the seer kind would come back is because it says here, ahead there were such sights unfolding, friends and places they'd feared gone forever coming to greet them, eager for shared rapture. So that's another thing that I really don't know if I think that some of the seer kind were saved from the destruction.
It says friends, feared gone forever, coming to greet them. So either, they disappeared with the fugue, or they were dead and they're back.
Yeah. So it's wonderful, happy ending.
Yeah.
Actually, rereading the book 3, when I was reading this part, and especially the part where Cal comes to grips of who he is and comes back, I kind of felt a little bit of tears like welling in the back of my eyes.
Me too. Yeah, I felt that way too. I was like,
very emotional.
Yeah. So you kind of forget that. You forget a lot of the detail of this book, over the years. But it felt like reading it again for the first time for me, which was great. I really appreciated, forcing myself to take the time to do this, even if it's, for our podcast.
I know. I could have read it more thoroughly, but I've just taken care of the whole thing with the paperwork of being in the United States and getting my green card, and it was a little busy here. But it really awakened in me the sense of how special it is to read a Clive Barker book.
Yeah.
And I would definitely recommend this book to people out there who might have not, people who have just seen like Clive Barker's movies and read some short stories, and maybe have read Aberrat and they want to get into something a little deeper. Go for Weaveworld, because it's
Weaveworld it's the perfect length too. It's not as intimidatingly huge as like Imagica.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's a nice springboard for Imagica.
Yeah.
Because in fact, the paperback that I had of Weaveworld, at the end of the story, it said, "And now here's a chapter from the upcoming book Imagica," and it had like the first chapter of Imagica.
That's cool.
So that was really cool. And I was, of course, anxious to read the next one.
I remember that too. I remember seeing that in the paperback that I had of Weaveworld, and back then, Imagica actually hadn't come out yet, so I actually did read that.
Right. So, amazing book, just amazing, and I would definitely recommend it to people who are trying to get into other Clive Barker books and may have read Aberrat and want to touch something deeper, because it escapes the boundaries that were being set around Clive at the time of being like Goremeister
and the future of horror.
And it definitely fleshed out the possibilities of where his fiction was going to go.
Yeah, and I think at this point that one reviewer that had really skewered the sequel to Lord of Illusions, and he had said in his review that The Great and Secret Show was such a huge disappointment because he should really go back to horror where he belongs.
Oh yeah, Andy Mangle in Fantasia magazine. Yeah, when he was talking about that unproduced script of Lord of Illusions 2.
So I think that he's wrong, because if people are having a problem with it being fantastical, really, Weaveworld was the start.
Yes.
Yeah, because and then he does one more horror novel after Weaveworld, Cabal, right? And then which is also kind of a mix of fantasy and horror.
Yeah.
But then after that, it's really, kind of more of an even mix of fantasy and horror, and Weaveworld was the start of that.
I think that person was dead wrong. And I think that one of the things that really increased the number of fans and expanded the whole number of people who started reading Clive Barker was because he did the leap into the fantastique.
Right, and nobody tells Stephen King, your Dark Towers are a waste of time.
Right.
I don't know, it's just... I don't know, it's a stupid argument. Really, why aren't you fitting into my pigeonhole?
Yeah, to some extent, I consider... Okay, not the way that Clive does it, but the way most old-fashioned horror writers do it. Mm-hmm. Horror is always this kind of like, I don't want to say immature, but it doesn't really handle any deep kind of subjects. Mm-hmm. It's just meant to
the fear of death.
Yeah, the fear of death, I guess. Yeah. But it doesn't really tackle anything. It's more like, okay, here's a monster, and it wants to kill people. Sometimes the monster has a reason, sometimes it doesn't. It's just like an archetypal monster. But it doesn't really tackle anything like really deep or philosophical, as much as you can do with the fantastical. The fantastical, you can talk about why are we here? What is possible? What is impossible? What is reality? There's all these things that are actually integral part of the genre of the fantastique, which you can't write it without tackling those issues. It's like, while the horror thing is more of a simple cut and dry thing, you can actually include some of those things in there, but then you're just expanding the horror into something else. Like Hellbound Heart. The Hellbound Heart is what some people might consider a horror novel, but
it's also an exploration of what it means to be, what's the definition of pleasure and pain and
it includes multiple dimensions, creatures that have, that see pleasure differently than us. What is the core of the Faustian bargain?
And be careful what you ask for.
Be careful what you ask for, and everything comes with a price, even if the price is part of the reward. I mean,
and that's been a theme in a lot of Clive Barker novels. Like even here in Weaveworld, Shadwell's jacket is, is like nothing's free.
Right.
You think you're getting these, the thing that you want most in the world, but it's just, it's just a tool to use people.
The price is going to be your disappointment when you realize it's not real.
Yeah, and your disappointment is equal to, the joy that you feel, of finding this thing.
Yeah, when you come down from it, it's just like any other fix. You'll just feel worse. And Shadwell keeps saying that anything you want, free, gratis, and without charge. But like you said, nothing is free.
Yeah.
And as for the Scourge, of course, this raises a lot of questions. So we get this notion that the Scourge was a creature that worked for a higher power, or powers, and forgot who he was and lost his way. And he was guarding something that he claimed to be Eden, but then Immaculata says it wasn't. It was just him applying the notions that he got from the Bible into his own obsession.
Well, and she says they debate in this novel over and over whether it really is Eden or not, and the answer is always kind of, does it really matter?
Right, right. It was a place of creation that was in the empty quarter.
And maybe our notion of Eden came from that real place.
And I guess when the spirits left that place, those higher spirits, I guess that's when it turned into the empty quarter. It also kind of a reflection of the emptiness inside of Uriel's head, I guess.
Yeah, and all of his fellow creatures left him there to guard something or to do something, and it sort of forgot itself.
Yes. And it's just a fantastic chapter when they find the garden made of sand, and it's just amazing. But yeah, this was a great book. Do we have any people who wrote anything?
We do, actually.
Okay.
Yes. So Rudy Dembinski on Facebook, he said, well, I have an older copy of Weaveworld that just happened to stumble upon, searching endlessly for it. All I have to say is that Clive has a way of creating these intense worlds that are both fearfully realistic yet intriguingly beautiful. And these worlds are so imaginative and wondrous, the mind can't help but wander aimlessly, living and experiencing vicariously through Clive's structure of words. Anytime I need to escape my own world, I pick up a Clive Barker novel.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I remember I had just moved to a new high school when Imagica came out, and I remember, not having people to sit with at lunch, so I'd just take my book over to the library or over to some place in the school where I was by myself and I would just read, and so, that's literally an escape for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I do that with the Magica. I mean, sometimes if I'm feeling like I'm in that weird funky mood, I just grab Imagica and just start reading it, and I just let myself be transported. I can even open it up in a random page somewhere and just read a couple of chapters.
I could never do that. I always have to go from beginning to end.
Oh, I've just read Imagica so much that I immediately jump into. It's like a familiar movie. You can jump into any part and you start quoting the lines of the actors.
Right.
And so Weaveworld is really, really special in that sense as well. Yeah. It really transports you into Wonderland.
Mm-hmm. And Paul Flewitt, who's been on our podcast, said, location-wise, Weaveworld is a story that could be set in my backyard. The terraced houses, the backyards described in the story, are the same as the houses in my hometown. In places, it has a very English feel. I can literally walk down my street and see the house where the carpet is found.
Yeah.
So I mean that's kind of something neat and special, I think, for Liverpool, people.
Yeah, because it does mention and evoke that feeling of a coastal city from England. It depicts like the houses, council housing and stuff like that, which is familiar to people from England. I mean, of course, I had to go and research some street maps and pictures of streets and find out what a brownstone is or what a council house is. But for those people, they can just put that mental image in there. It's easy for them. Also, I was going to mention that I think it's really funny, the things that he comes up with for the fugue, like a place called Nonsuch, which is just a mishmash of streets that people brought in with them in glyph form to be included in the fugue.
Right, so no city planners or anything. It's all just kind of random. And
it's just random streets that misconnect between themselves. And places like the Rock of the First Fatalities, where the first people got killed by the Scourge. Yeah. And also the Narrow Bright. These names are just amazing. They just listening to the names, you kind of know that they're from this wonderland.
Yeah, and they also are so Clive Barker.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Craig Reese says, awesome, been waiting for this one, guys. Do you think there will ever be a movie version? And who would you have direct it? Do you think the surgeons are indeed the Cenobites? Where do you think Immaculata got the coat she gave Shadwell? The shiny lined cell sand to Arab's jacket. I love this book also as much as Imagica, and that's a lot. Have fun, guys. So first thing, movie version, we talked about this. I think it would need to be a miniseries to get the pacing right.
Yeah.
As far as who directs it, as long as they're a fan, I really don't care.
I would say Terry Gilliam.
that would be good.
Get Terry Gilliam to do that. I don't remember if he ever did anything for TV, but that would be great.
I would like to see it take its time and be spread over maybe even an entire year, of a miniseries. 12 hours or 10 hours.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And then it could even, if it's popular enough, it could even go on from there, and they could invent new stuff to happen after the ending of the novel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, go into. I don't want to fall into a cliche, but you can go into prequel territory, like do a period piece on the late 1800s and what happened to the Scourge, and how did the Seerkind live? How did they loom the first version of the fugue and stuff like that? I would love to see that.
And when he said, "Do you think the surgeons are indeed the Cenobites?" I mean,
yes. I think that's actually been confirmed, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's on the Wikipedia page, and I think someone has asked that more than one occasion to Clive.
Geez, he had just written The Hellbound Heart 1 year earlier, and he just had finished Hellraiser while he was writing Weaveworld, so absolutely yes.
And I'm sure that someone asked him that before many times, and he always confirmed it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just a cool thing that ties this stuff together. And where do you think Immaculata got the jacket? It isn't really clear. I mean, I think she made it personally.
Did you mention that the raptures of the jacket, right? So Immaculata had put some raptures on that jacket.
Yeah.
But it does seem like they were pretty powerful raptures.
Mm-hmm. Well, and she was a lot more powerful than Susanna.
Yeah, and I think that she might have used old science, so
yeah.
They never really explain what old science is,
and
though.
Maybe it was a jacket that he owned already and that she put the magic on, or maybe she just created it. We don't really know. It's not explained.
I guess it came from the Aberrat.
Yeah. Yeah, and he says he loves this book almost as much as Imagica. Yeah, sure.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
I think sometimes I'll say Weaveworld. We talked about this last episode. I think you had mentioned this too, and it's the same with me when somebody asks what your favorite book is of all time. Sometimes for me it's Weaveworld.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it's definitely special.
There was a time when I would say Cabal. It's really hard to pick.
It is. I guess Cabal, in my mind, and I guess most of Clive Barker's fans, Cabal kind of melds away into Nightbreed, and the same thing happens with Hellraiser and the Hellbound Hearts.
Oh, for sure.
So we end up misremembering some things because we think of the movie in some occasions instead of the book. But yeah, I really should reread Cabal.
And I think, and Paul Flewitt, when he was on our episode and we were talking about Clive Barker memories, and he had said he felt like there was a resurgence in Clive's popularity now, whereas in the 90s people didn't really know who he was. And I feel the opposite. I think that in the 90s Clive was sort of at the height of his popularity, and his late 80s novels were the right length to make into movies. So we have Hellraiser and Nightbreed.
I agree.
But now his novels are so big that if you try to make a movie out of them, it's kind of a travesty.
I don't know if this is accurate to say, but I would say that in the 90s more people were reading his books and waiting for his movies, and nowadays more people know about Clive Barker, but that doesn't mean that they're reading his books or, watching his movies.
Yeah, I mean, I know I live in a small community that's sort of sheltered or whatever, but the most I can ever get out of people is like, is that with the guy that's got the pins in his head?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, right, that's what it is.
Right.
And it's like, people ask, well, why do you like Clive Barker? And it's like, well, I've got a podcast that's, we've got probably like 60 hours of us talking about why we like Clive Barker. So
when someone asks you why you like Clive Barker, you should say, try reading a book.
yeah, right. I mean, it's like, do you have 60 hours for me to explain? I know. I think probably reading a book, Weaveworld might be the best entry-level one for people who misunderstand and think that he's just a horror author. Yeah. If somebody just wants his most horrific novel, the Hellbound Heart or Cabal or the Books of Blood, or the Damnation Game. The Damnation Game, honestly, is not his best book, but it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about that one on our previous episode.
The thing about Clive Barker, being a fan of Clive Barker, and this, I'm going to quote something that Harley Davidson fans, writers, quote sometimes. It's like, for those who understand, no explanation is needed. For those who don't, no explanation is possible.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I had my neighbor asking me about this because they're like, why would you spend... So, because they know that I do this podcast, but they don't understand why. And it's like, why would you spend so much time talking about one person?
Yep. But seriously, read a book. Read a book and you'll understand. You know?
Yeah, and I guess, I don't have my paperbacks anymore, so I'm a little bit reluctant to loan them out.
And then again, it's like, it's not for everybody. I mean, not everybody is going to enjoy reading a book about, like, Weaveworld. But a lot of people will probably say, "Oh, it's too weird for me" or something. Yeah. They'll just put it away. That's fine. Nobody has to like the same things.
And there are people out there that only want to read nonfiction too. I mean, and I'm the opposite.
Right, exactly. There are people who just want to read books about, the coal miners in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's fine. I mean, but if you like fiction and weird stuff in your fiction and beautifully written prose, give a try to one of Clive Barker's books, and you won't be sorry. Just make sure you don't go for one of those books that continues.
Right.
Don't go for Galilee or Cold Hard Canyon. Well, it doesn't really continue.
Yeah, I guess that one doesn't. You could say that about Abarat too. I mean, they're going to be done the soonest, most likely, but still, it's going to be a while before we have all 5.
Right.
Yeah, and the Books of the Art, that's the first time. Well, and actually, Cabal he had originally said it was going to be a trilogy, and then he was so disappointed by what happened with Nightbreed that Cabal will probably never happen again as a trilogy.
Even though it ends on a to be continued note, to me it didn't really bother me though. I'm happy with that because it's like this people is trying to escape and. Well,
and at the time that Cabal came out, there were so many. There was like all these. There's this whole world of Clive Barker books that I hadn't read yet. And
it's the weirdest happy. It's the weirdest happy ending ever because they lose everything. Their home is destroyed.
Yeah.
But somehow we get the feeling that it's kind of a happy ending because
there's hope.
There's hope.
Yeah, and it's amazing because if you just describe that ending to somebody, it'd be like, oh my god.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
You mean that they lost like a third of their numbers and their houses exploded and they're living in a barn in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the main character's fault.
Yeah, and it's the main character's, and it's the hero's fault.
Yeah.
And in fact,
and that's why he's the savior.
Yeah, that's why he's the savior. He's the Messiah.
Yeah, because he ruined their lives.
So what's next?
Yeah. You mean next for the podcast?
No, next for listener feedback. Oh,
actually, that was the last one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was really fun, and I'm sorry if I wasn't up to par with all the characters' names and all the storylines, but
yeah, it's okay. We just would have talked longer if you'd read.
Gosh, I'm trying to figure out what's it going to be like when we analyze Imagica.
Yeah, we're not going to make it there this year anyway.
Right, right. So for the next coming episodes, we'll try to get some really cool interviews going.
Yeah, we've got one coming up in a week, and we'll just leave that for a surprise. And that'll be our 50th episode, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be, because this is number 49, so that'll be 50, and then after that we're gonna take a little bit of a break from novels, and we'll be talking about some comic books and movies.
Kopp.
Yeah, Andrew Kopp is going to be reviewing comic books in print on the website.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so every week he'll be doing that. I mean, and if there's anybody out there among our listeners that wants to do written reviews or opinions or features or news, we'd like to have more stuff showing up on our website so that we have more visitors and more listeners. But Jose and I just don't have the time to have something new on that site every day. So, if it's just us, then mostly all we have are posts about our recent podcast episode.
And it's also nice to have, other people have different points of view and send us stuff about their collections and stuff like that. So so it's not always like me and Ryan.
Yeah. So we're looking for more writers. And, of course, anybody that's a writer can be a guest on our episode when we talk about your particular area or, anything that you want to talk about. So, yeah, I think we've kind of hit the end.
All right.
So, as of this, as I'm editing here, Andrew Kopp has done his first review on the site, so go check it out. That is for Hellraiser 1, the comic book. So the first comic book from, I believe, March of 1989. And he does a detailed review of that. If you're saying, hey, I'm a Clive Barker fan, I'm thinking about getting into Clive Barker comic books, he's planning on covering them all. So go check that out. It's on the website as of last night as I'm So as of Tuesday night of the July 30th. Okay, 2013. So yep, this was it for episode 49. Our next one, we're going to have a special guest, and that should be coming soon. So, all right, we'll see you later.